G'day everyone. Today we're going to have a look at the center bearing on this Toyota Hilux. We're going to remove and replace it and have a look at the uni joints as well. We'll go step by step how to remove the shaft, how to change the center bearing, and how to put it all back together.
Okay, firstly and very importantly, we need to make sure we chock the wheels on the vehicle. If we remove the drive shaft, there is a chance the vehicle will roll away, especially if the park brake happens to be on the drive shaft, like a lot of four-wheel drives, or if your parking brake isn't very good and you're relying on the car being in gear or park. So make sure you chock them wheels, and then we're going to have a look at removing this center bearing here. You can see mine has a crack in it and we need to change it out. Now we're going to mark everything as we pull it apart. It's very important to make sure that all of the yokes go back in phase with one another to avoid any vibrations. So we witness mark everything we pull apart and we just make sure it goes back in the same place. These nuts here are a 14mm socket and they're around about 88 Newton meters, so they're not too bad. We can undo them by hand, and the studs in the back are actually press studs, so we don't need to worry about them going anywhere. They'll stay in the back of the yoke and we can just undo the nuts with the 14mm socket. I'm marking here the other yoke on the back end of the vehicle. It's split in two and that will actually stay with the car, that particular section of drive shaft. I'm going to just put a little bit of WD-40 here on the center bearing bolts just to make sure they come out without destroying any threads if there's a lot of dirt there or anything. We just want to make it easy for that bolt. We do not want to damage those threads, and we can just undo them with a rattle gun and the whole shaft will come apart as it all falls to the ground. You can see here the slip joint doesn't quite have enough length to get that center section away from the rear section, but as we drop it down it will separate and we can leave that rear section sitting on the ground hanging off the back of the car.
Okay, so the shaft is now out of the vehicle. We've got our center bearing here and we've got our uni joint on this side here. We're going to inspect the shaft, make sure none of the balance weights have come off. You can normally see a little bit of evidence where a balance weight would have been. Make sure there's no damage from forward driving or anything like that. Check the condition of the unis, and of course we're here to change out the center bearing, which we have a new one here. There is a nut on the end of the yoke here. It's quite a large nut. We'll undo that, pull the yoke off, and then we can knock the center bearing off.
Okay, so firstly we need to take this nut off in order to remove the yoke. It's a 24mm socket and it is a stake nut. You can see here the nut is fitted and then it is peened over so it doesn't come loose. We need to unstake it in order to undo it, and usually we'd have to replace this nut. I'm going to use it again with a bit of Loctite, but it is advised to replace the nut.
Okay, so we've put a puller on the yoke here. You can probably knock it off with a big hammer. I've got a puller here. We've put the nut back on so when it comes off it doesn't fly off at us. It's all set up. We're just going to hit it here and see if we can pull it off. So let's give it a go. Pretty straightforward. It wasn't that tight. Like I said, you could probably knock it off with a hammer. I've got the tool here. I figured we might as well use it. Okay, we set up pretty much the same to get the center bearing off. Once again, you could probably knock it off with a hammer, but we've got the tool here, so we're going to use it. Let's see how we go.
And that is the center bearing off. The rubber was quite flexible, but eventually it did come away.
Okay, so we've got the center bearing off. We noted which way around it was when it came off. So the little cutout here goes away from the shaft. The rubber has some cracks in it. The bearing actually wasn't too bad, but I have a new one here to fit. We'll whack that on after cleaning up the shaft with some Scotch-Brite. We'll put the yoke back on, we'll torque the nut, and we'll stake the nut as well. Okay, we have our brand new center bearing here. We're gonna have our cutout facing out. I've cleaned up the shaft, and we're just gonna drop it on in around about the right place. I'm actually going to pull it in with the yoke. Now behind this, there was a spacer. Don't forget the spacer that goes in here prior to the yoke going on. And then we can whack the yoke on here, which I've also cleaned up a little bit, just to make sure there's no debris going into that center bearing. I'm going to slide the yoke on. And we'll pull it all together with the nut and the washer. We have the washer, we don't want to forget that either, it's very, very thick. And then we have the nut, and we'll pull it all the way home, and then I'll take the nut back off and we'll confirm that this has been pulled all the way home, and then we'll put it all together and put some Loctite on it.
Pulling the yoke in like this helps to seat the center bearing. It sets everything where it needs to be. We'll loosen the nut back off and we'll make sure that we Loctite it and stake it at the correct torque.
Okay, so when it comes time to put the yoke on, we're just going to put a little bit of Loctite on here. And we're going to go ahead, put the yoke on with the washer. The washer happens to be already attached to my yoke. Make sure that's all good. I put the nut on, and there's two torque specs. We need to torque them up to 181 Newton meters. Then we're going to loosen the nut and we're going to tighten it to 82 Newton meters. Now that's the higher of the two ends. There's two different manufacturers. One is 62, one is 82. I'm going to go with the higher end. I think 82 Newton meters is going to be just fine. We'll pull it in with the rattle gun. Okay, that's been pulled home with the rattle gun. We're going to make sure that is at least the 181 Newton meters it needs to be. Okay, cool. Now we're going to back it off. And we're going to do it up to 82. So we'll drop this down to 82 Newton meters. Okay, I'm happy that's there. Now we need to stake the nut. We're just going to hit it with a punch back into the flat spot of the shaft itself. It should end up in about the same spot it did before, and mine has. So we're basically just going to restake the nut. In an ideal world, we replace the nut, but I think with a bit of Loctite, the right torque, and we're staking it, it's not going to go anywhere. Now when it comes to staking the nut, I'm just going to use a punch. The end of the punch is about the same size as the slot in the thread there. So we're just going to punch it into there and make sure it can't come undone. Now you may find that this is very tight when we first pull it together, and you may need to just give it a few revolutions just to loosen it up and let the rubber sit in its two seal areas here. Once you do, it should free up pretty well. Mine was very tight, and I just used a pry bar just to slowly work it around and free everything up. Okay, I'm just going to buff this face and clean all this up from mounting it, and then we'll switch over and I'll show you guys how to pull apart the universal joint. I think this one will go again, but I'll show you how to pull it apart regardless. We'll grease it and we'll put it all back together. Okay, when it comes to the uni joint, we have a cross in the middle. We have these 4 cups on the outside that hold the needle roller bearings. We have the needle roller bearings themselves, and we have the circlip here. There's 4 of them, and they hold the whole thing together. Once we knock the circlip out, we'll do it through here. We can knock the whole yoke across, remove the cup, and repeat it on the other side. They're fairly simple to pull apart once we know what we're doing. Okay, so that's the circlip there. That holds this cup in and it stops the whole thing sliding left and right. There's one on each side. So what we do now, we've got that circlip out. It allows us to knock this yoke this way and we can remove the cup, and then we'll repeat it on this side and we can actually remove the entire yoke. So what we'll do is give this a tap and see how much it moves. Okay, now that we've got that started, I'm going to knock this circlip out this side, which I've just done. There we go, that's that one. And then we're going to do the same on this side. We're just going to knock the yoke down to loosen up the cup until we can manipulate it out of there. Okay, a few whacks later, of course with a soft hammer. We always use a soft hammer on this sort of stuff just to make sure we're not damaging anything. We can then hopefully pull this cup off. Just don't drop your needle bearings everywhere. They're full of needle rollers. And once we've done that, we have enough movement to get past this end of the yoke. So we'll do the same on the other side. We'll pull the cup out and then we can take the yoke off. A pin punch is also a good friend here. It can help just give you that blow that's in just the right spot to get the cup to move. So that's that one. We'll keep that matched with that one. We'll make sure we remember which one is which. Now once you get the angle right, we should be able to just lift this off. There we go. So we'll clean up our yoke, we'll clean up our bores. If you're gonna replace the cross, so you're gonna replace the whole uni joint, we just repeat the process. We knock the 2 clips out of the main drive shaft and we just hold the cross in the vise and we just tap the drive shaft down and remove the cup, tap the drive shaft the other way and remove the cup. Exactly the same way we did with the yoke there. We basically just take the two clips off and move the cross left and right in order to get the two cups out. So we'll clean all this up. We'll make sure that it accepts grease, and I'm going to put it all back together. Okay, like I said before, I'm not going to bother to change this side. I think the cross and the bearings are good, and the procedure is the same to take it apart if you need to. Make sure none of the needle rollers have fallen into the cup if you intend to reuse your cross. I've checked to make sure it all accepts grease, and it does. I've checked to make sure all the needle rollers haven't fallen out because they'll cause dramas when we put it together. And I'm going to put some fresh grease in here and here, and we're going to put the yoke back on, and then we're going to put these cups on with new grease. So let's get started and we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, we're just giving our yoke a bit of a clean up. We're going to slide it back on. There we go. Now we get our cups with our needle rollers and we're going to load them with grease. We don't hydraulic them either, so we don't go too nuts. We can always put grease in through the grease nipple there. Just going to slam that back on like that. And we're going to give it a couple of taps just to make sure it's home. Okay, same with the other side. We'll give it a tap and then I'm going to pull it all together with the vise. Okay, we just pull that together with the vise. See how strong I am. Alternatively, we can just tap these home on a hard surface like this vise. So we'll do that just to finish them off. Put the clips in. If we can't get the clips in and we've pushed them home all the way, we may have trapped a needle roller. We just got to be aware of that. If we can get the clips in, we should be good. When it comes time to put the clips back in, we just pop them in where they came from. Pretty good. We just do the same on the other side. Okay, that all back together. We're just going to give it a good greasing because it's a good time to do so. We basically grease it till it comes past the seals. Then we know it's got enough grease. That's cool. Any extra grease will just be flung off all on the underside of the car, but that's okay. Give it a good clean out.
Okay, just before we bolt it up, we're going to make sure that the center line of the shaft, where the yoke is sitting up on the vise here, is in line with the yoke that we've removed with the studs in it. Basically, the center line between the two studs should be in line with the yoke on the drive shaft. We can confirm it here under the car and make sure all of the yokes line up with one another. If we put it back where it came from, it should be in the right spot. We're going to tighten up the transmission side first, tighten up all four of the yoke bolts, and we're going to torque them down to 88 Newton meters. Nice and evenly, we'll go around, torque all of them to 88 Newton meters, and then we can tighten up the center bearing carrier. Now the center bearing carrier is 36 Newton meters, and we want to tighten that up only after we've tightened up the transmission side so it sits in the right spot. The holes are slotted, and we want to make sure we've got it exactly where it needs to be. Of course, like I said before, these are 36 Newton meters. It's not very tight. I put a little bit of Loctite on the bolts just to make sure they don't go anywhere. Once we've done that, we can torque up the rear shaft once again to 88 Newton meters, just like the transmission side, and make sure we torque them evenly. And I go around and just double check everything's how it should be. Take the car for a test drive, make sure there's no annoying noises or no unsettling vibrations, and everything should be good. Other than that, thank you very much for watching.